we're unpacking the aviation industry today. And for most laymen like myself, sitting at home, missing holidays and missing family and just missing normal life, I often wonder what it's like to be in the center of this degree of disruption. You've got environmentalists celebrating that the environment has been saved because aircraft isn't flying, but on the complete opposite end of the spectrum are real lives that have been impacted in quite a significant way. My first question to you, which requires a one-word answer, is what was your first ever job? Let's start with Els because he kind of reacted a little more than everybody else. So I'm curious to know why he as well.
My first job was actually flight dispatch, and I was lucky to have that position back home in my home country. So it was something new for me. I'd never done flight dispatch before, but it was quite an interesting challenge. You know, you learn new things every day, and looking at it in retrospect, it was one of the most amazing jobs I've ever so far.
So you actually went straight into aviation. You didn't work at OK Bazaars or some random place. You went straight in for the kill.
No, I went straight in for it. Straight after flight school, I only spent about 3 months at home, and then I got my first job.
Okay, right. Let's hear from Lewa, please.
I worked as a cashier at a CD store. So
there we go.
That was my first job. Yeah.
Someone keeping it real. Not everybody starts off by being a pilot in this world. So fantastic.
No, I was packing CDs. So yeah.
Very good. How about you, Jennifer?
I started as an ops assistant at the airport for about 6 months, part-time, but that's what I did first, my first ever job.
Wow. So straight into the airport scene as well. Tatenda, what did you do?
Yeah.
I was an assistant for my brother's medical practice, and I was selling chickens.
Oh, nice. Okay. So you see, I love this type of diversity. Are you proud of that label? Are you proud to say that, or does it make you squirm a bit because you think you've outgrown?
I'm very proud because it contributed to part of my aviation training.
Tahira, what about you?
My first job was a flight instructor, but when I was still training to be a commercial pilot, I did have many jobs then. Okay. I was a waitress and I washed airplanes to get free hours, and I worked admin at the flight school.
Now, you see, the reason I ask these questions is because, you know, you've got a lot of people who've got these, I'll call them delusions, I'll use that word quite freely, that when you get into a profession, you just start off on the top of your food chain, which isn't quite reality. So there's really quite a lot to be said about how people start their careers. Those who follow the page or who know anything about me will know that I come with my financial services background. My first job was selling men's underwear in a department store in London. The interesting thing is everybody used to come and say that they're large when they see little pretty girls selling underwear. So that was always quite an interesting dynamic at play. But that was my job until I was ready to go to university. Okay, so with that in mind, mapping the fact that not everybody just started off by following a traditional path of going to flight school and flying immediately. Let me know then, who inspired you to take to the air?
So I think who inspired me, I had many mentors before I even started my aviation career. I managed to bump into a pilot, Doug Elliott Wilson. He's an SAA pilot. I bumped into him my final year of high school, and that's been my mentor. He's guided me through a lot of the challenges you have in aviation, and I was lucky that I managed to bump into him at that point. But it's something that we need to do more of as pilots, become more mentors to more kids to see pilots at a young age.
You didn't tell me what your first job was. Sorry, I left you out.
Well, my first job was an operations controller, but it was more of a cashier for a flight school. I worked there for a couple of months.
For me, it was a bit different. I've always been that person that knew she wanted to be a pilot. So I kind of had to inspire myself, because there was no pilot in my family and I did not have access to pilots. It was just something within. So I had to inspire myself by watching documentaries on YouTube, National Geographic, just dreaming of it and finding inspiration in myself. And I also think that we should have more mentors, because I think my path would have been maybe different if I had a mentor to speak to. Maybe I was going to do it earlier, maybe I was going to do it later. Anyways, everything happened for a reason.
Sure. Can you pinpoint the time when you decided this is the career for me? Do you remember what was happening? Like as a little girl, was there something significant, or you just knew?
So little. I think as early as 3 or 4, I just wanted to fly. And every single person I've met, maybe from my family, from my friends, when they asked me what I wanted to do, it was, I want to be a pilot. And I remember in school, my teacher saying, yeah, you want to be a... So because I was wearing glasses, I thought it wasn't a possibility. And I think having that stubbornness of, I want to prove them wrong. So I just kept going. And growing up, I kind of shifted a little bit, wanted to go for engineering instead, but still aerospace engineering. And then life kind of brought me back to becoming a pilot. So I would say very young, 4 or 5, and never really had a plan B. It was always that or nothing. I would just have stayed home and do nothing.
Wow, no, that is most inspiring. What about you, Tahira?
I was only 4 years old, actually. Gonna give away my age, but it was in 1995, and I attended an air show at Charles Prince Airport where I ended up doing my private pilot license. So my dad took me for an air show, and Air Zimbabwe at the time was doing a very low flyby, and it was from that day I told my dad I'm gonna be a pilot one day. And he didn't believe me growing up. You know, it goes back to the gender-based part of it, of females are not going to be pilots, and you know, having a family, having a husband and kids, it's not possible. But no, I stuck with it, and I didn't have any mentors growing up as well. So again, it was the same thing Jennifer saying, it's self-motivation, and you just got to keep going, and that was my passion from the start. Yeah.
Amazing. All right, let's hear from you, please, Lawa.
I have a similar story with Jennifer as well, where from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to be a pilot. I was intrigued with aircraft from a very, very young age. I told my parents actually when I was small, I said, I want to fly planes. And my parents said, no, you can't. And my primary school had a field trip to the Air Force actually. And my parents refused to sign my indemnity form. And I was the only child in the whole school who didn't go on the aviation field trip.
No.
My parents were trying so hard to keep me away from aviation, but I was persistent because it was something that I always knew that I wanted.
That is quite something. And you know, for you to, so far I'm hearing this idea of against all odds, if it's you, Jennifer, being told that you don't have Vision 2020, so you can't do it, or your parents thinking, oh, we want to protect presumably our daughter, or whatever their motivation was for saying no. Let's hear from you, Els.
For me, I can't pinpoint exactly where the aviation bug hit, but what I do recall vividly is that I moved to a school, to a new school for my grade, and it happened to be located within 1 nautical mile of Charles Prince Airport. Now, we'd hear planes flying over us at all times. You could be in an English lesson, and you just hear next thing the plane flying overhead. And I think that was just some inspirational stuff. I hadn't flown my flight at that point, but at the age of 9, I got my first chance to fly on a flight from Harare to Bulawayo and back to, and I think at that point solidified, I knew that this is what I wanted in my life.
Absolutely inspiring. Tatenda?
Well, I'm a bit different from everyone else. Aviation wasn't something I thought I'll ever be involved in. It actually came when I was in upper 6, because when I was in upper 6, I thought I would do a business degree. So it wasn't more of who, but what. When I was in upper 6, my dad took me to the local airport, which is Charles Prince, and I was lucky enough to sit in one of the small aircrafts. It was actually a Cherokee, and I'm quite tall, and sitting in this aircraft, I was like close to the controls, and you know, just talking to one of the pilots, you know, telling me that this is that, this is this, and you know, it really sounded Chinese gibberish to me. And from there, I just had a passion of, I want to be able to know every button in this and be able to actually fly it. And from there, that's where the passion started.
So having framed that, I want to now understand at the points that you get into the field and you fly your first aircraft, was there anything that you discovered along the way that you either hadn't anticipated or disappointed you about the industry? So, you know, I've deliberately made sure that we've got a balance of males and females, for instance, on this panel, because I think it's only too often that women are kind of either left out of discourse or are the forgotten breed, or just don't tend to break into certain spaces. So I've got a lot of respect for the 3 women on this panel, the guys as well, but I'm going to big up my women because it's Women's Month and because I can. So well done to all of you. I think a lot of us kind of looking at pilots and the glamour of kind of rolling into airports, and you know, we just think you guys are these mad geniuses who have to know everything about everything in order to keep us suspended in air. But going in, talk me through the realities. What disappointed you? What surprised you? Whoever's brave enough to go first.
The thing that disappointed me the most or surprised me the most was the fact that the training and the flight path is not very linear. It's not at all. Let's just be honest. And you have envisioned something when you go to flight school. Okay, my exams are going to take me 6 months. My training is going to take me an extra 6 months, and then I'm out. But then you go there and you realize that there's a lot of failures. Like that's where you learn to fail. That's when you learn to make peace with failure. So growing up, I wasn't really used to fail. It was always you do stuff and you go home, you get a good grade, everybody's proud of you. And I had to face failure on the regular, understanding that it's only human to fail, understanding that if you don't understand something, you have to ask. You can't figure things out by yourself. You can't go back to your room and rehearse how to fly an airplane because there's no airplane in your room. So you have to be with people that can help you. And it was a very humbling experience, but at first very disappointing to feel like, oh, I thought I was immune to failure, but apparently I'm not. So obviously on the long run, you get used to it and you learn lessons from it. But at first it was very shocking.
As you say that, I'm holding my breath and thinking, what sort of failure happens when people are in a cockpit? We don't want to hear these things. Okay. What does failure look like?
No, when I mean failure, I don't mean like technical failure in the airplane, not at all. But I mean failing your exam, your theory exams, because we have to write a whole bunch of exams before we are apt to fly. And failing that kind of takes a lot away from your self-confidence if you're not ready for it, and you fail at that, and there's some lessons where you don't pick up the lesson initially. I remember I struggled with T-turns because I had to learn not to apply too much back pressure, because I was thinking I'm so small, they expect me to overdo it. So I ended up overdoing everything, and now I had to learn to let go. So at first when this happens, you look around and you don't really have anybody to explain this to you, because you're not used to the whole environment of failure and everything. So it kind of gets saddening at some point, but you just need the right people around you, and again, to draw that self-motivation to understand that it's okay if you fail, you're gonna win eventually.
Okay, grand. Let's hear from Tatenda.
Well, I think I had two things that disappointed me. Firstly was how fast money would run out because the flying was constantly happening. So you'd notice that after a week or 2 weeks, you're being told by the accounts that your money is finished, and it's quite very expensive. And the second one was basically when you would go solo, which is when you'd fly the aircraft by yourself for the first time. What was disappointing, I think it's improving a bit, but it's still a problem, was you'd find something always occurring that, not to be racial or controversial, that
be racial and controversial. I'd love to hear it. Call a spade a spade.
A certain color would usually go solo at a lower amount of hours as to another color, and that was quite disappointing.
Oh, that was the polite way of saying that white people get first dibs. Tahira, what's your take?
It actually goes back to what Tatenda was saying. Going solo, just the instructors that you have. It has, from myself being a flight instructor, it looks like it was changing. I don't know about right now, but when I was in flying school, you would do a specific lesson and a certain standard is expected of you. For example, just to progress to the next level or to go solo. And at that moment in time, you're doing everything that the instructor wants. The landings are fine, everything's fine, but then he doesn't send you solo, or he doesn't send you to the next stage of your flight training. The reason that happens, and I only understood it once I became a flight instructor, was in the beginning to get a job is very hard. So a lot of people start off as a flight instructor if they don't have opportunities. And being a flight instructor, every hour that you instruct is your hour as well. So you're able to build hours to get a next job, which is better for you. So instructors would purposely delay training so that you got to go and repeat a lesson. They make more hours, they get along in life. You kind of don't. So that's what sadly used to happen, and it was very disappointing, and I only realized that this was what used to happen once I became an instructor myself, and I made it a thing that I would never do that to people, because you're finishing their money, like you say, the account is running dry and now you're stuck, and yeah, that's the most disappointing part that I experienced.
Sure. And the fact that finance is coming up in various guises is something I'm going to want us to deep dive on a little bit, just to understand how that whole structure works. John, could you tell us your disappointment or big surprise?
Yeah, so I think my biggest disappointment was actually finding out once I finished my commercial pilot's license that the amount of actual hand flying you do is pretty minimal. You're there to monitor and press buttons. I used to enjoy the hand flying during training. You flew the aircraft from takeoff to landing, whereas once you go into an airline, you take off and about 2,000 foot, which is basically 10 seconds, you're going onto autopilot, and your landing is pretty much the last 15 seconds, 30 seconds of the flight. That was a bit of a disappointment for me.
That sounds like something MacGyver would appreciate. But yeah, if it was disappointing. Understood. Okay, Laura, what's your disappointing story or surprise?
I think for me, it was when you complete your commercial pilot license qualification, they don't tell you how extremely difficult it is to get a job after that. There is quite a huge challenge in aviation when you qualify and you're still an inexperienced pilot and you struggle to get jobs because charter companies say, okay, for insurance purposes, you need to at least have an X amount of hours, and you can't go there. You can't go to an airline either because you're still inexperienced. And then in the South African landscape, charter operators and certain operators would predominantly hire white people, and then you get stuck and you can't find a job. So that's a very difficult thing as a pilot, is once you've qualified, how do I find a job? And I think the other disappointment I had is just to add on the effect of the racial structures and the effect of these gender structures that create barriers in our industry, is that you end up doubting yourself. And I think that's the greatest hurdle that I had. I doubted myself, my confidence went down, and it actually had no relation to my ability, but it's these structures that are there, these barriers and challenges that we have related to race and gender, where you end up feeling like, am I good enough? Am I a good pilot? And that's the challenge.
And I can imagine you guys being kind of driven by excellence, right? So we all know that you've got to be really intelligent to occupy this space, or you've got lives at stake, so you need to know most things, science, geography, the works. And I can imagine being a top performer and being told how smart you are, and then getting into an environment where you're starting to self-doubt for the very reasons that you're stating, Laura, which, it's good to see people still pushing forward and maybe sometimes having to reinvent or rethink their career paths. And I know that a couple of you are changing or have changed course along the way. But again, I'm hopeful that we don't run out of time. We might have to do a round 2 because I'm really enjoying the build up, and I've got so many things I want to know about your industry and about you. But we'll come back to that. I've left Els out. So Els, let us know quickly what your big ticket crikey was.
First thing, I just heard you mentioned it just now, that our industry requires the smartest or brightest amongst the people, which was something that I found to be untrue. Got into the industry. There is no algebra in flight training. There is no X, Y, solve, differentiate, none of that. It's all basic mathematics. 2 + 2 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Okay, distance, speed, time. And that was something that I found quite interesting, shocking. Apart from that, there was also the fact that I just come out of high school a few months earlier before I started my training. So in that environment, they expect you to work alone, excel, and be your best. Now in flight school, that's a recipe for failure. You need to depend on your leagues. You need to work together as a team. If you're not sure, ask someone, how can I go about this? And that was something that I had to change within me, from being someone who works alone to becoming a team player. Now, as mentioned earlier by one of the panelists, was the fact that whilst we're in flight school, we make it seem as once you're done with your training, there's someone waiting, eagerly waiting to get a job, which is completely not true. As no one is waiting for you, and it's you trying to land yourself on your feet, which can be very challenging. I remember sending out several CVs when I graduated, and I thought they were waiting for me, but I'd spend the next 100 days just idling at home without a job. that was something that I really found to be different from what I had in my mind.
So you've just disproved, you've made me rethink my understanding of what you do. If you're telling me that being a genius isn't a prerequisite to being a pilot, then you've literally just blown my understanding of your world. And I'm feeling I'm grieving actually, because I wasn't expecting to hear this today. Okay, so tell me, do you get to go to university to be a pilot, or do you go straight to flight school?
Well,
yeah, you go straight to flight
for
school.
me, I went straight to flight school after high school.
Okay, so any university graduates here, because this is something again that we tend to talk about quite a lot. How necessary is it to be a university graduate? So we've got one. That's an interesting statistic. Do you feel restricted? Do you feel that you've missed out on anything? Do you think that, when you think about life after the air, what does that look and feel like for you? Or are you completely unfazed by it all?
Yeah, definitely. I think a degree or another qualification is important, because anything can happen. Anything can happen to you. I learned that last year because I was in quite a serious car accident. Luckily, I came out without any injuries. But anything can happen. You can lose your medical, and tomorrow you won't have a job if you don't have your medical. So I'm definitely looking at doing a degree, but more based on the aviation side.
Is there anybody else?
Back on it.
Yeah. Sure. Anyone else of a similar or opposed view?
Yes, I just like to Tender said, I'm looking into BCom in aviation management soon.
Yeah,
and
me too.
Okay, so almost universally, you all think that it's important to have that backup plan, which is quite interesting. Now, we talked about finance earlier on, the whole model around financing your profession. How does that work? So you talked about your wallet running empty.
So basically, it's a lot of the flying schools want you to pay the full lump sum.
I was funded by the South African government on a pilot bursary program that they had. So for me, it was quite different. The government paid for everything.
Did you have to go through hoops for that to happen? As in you're competing with hundreds and thousands of people and becoming top of class to get sponsorship?
Absolutely. I applied for about 4 years. I kept getting declined. And on the 4th year, then I got it. It's quite competitive. It's quite challenging. But, I would say people must just keep persevering and don't give up applying and seeking those kind of funding opportunities.
Yeah, so it's either you get a scholarship or you apply for government funding through some transportation department. But the majority of it is, if you're not getting any of the above, you've got to pay for it out of your own pocket, which is very expensive. And it's not a case where, I guess, like university is over semesters or years, so you've got time to pay it off. Whereas flying, it's quite demanding in a short space of time. So you pay as you fly, but if you don't have the money, it stops your progress as well, because they won't let you fly without having money in your account to debit, right? So yeah, it's very challenging in that regard, because you've got to make sure that you have all the cash. And well, in South Africa, for example, it's like R500,000 to get a CPL license. So that's like about $30,000, which you need like in a space of, call it 1 year, you can do your CPL in a year. And the faster you get done, the faster you can start getting around to getting a job. So financially, it's a big strain. So if you don't have the money, it's a big problem. Yeah.
And there is a perception that this is a career for the privileged more often than not, because not many people are able to afford flight school, which again becomes an automatic selection process, if you like, for the haves and the have-nots. Particularly if you don't come from environments that are big on funding education of this sort. Okay, so having then understood a bit about you, about your choices, the industry, let's now talk about disruption. The title of tonight's show is around navigating disruption in the aviation space. And, when I was thinking through my discussion points with you, one of the things that occurred to me is, the big ticket stuff leading up to now in recent history was volcanic ash and 9/11. And then you get to COVID, which just brings a completely different set of rules. And you guys are grounded for the amount of time that you have. I know a lot of pilots who are losing their jobs. I know a lot of, flight attendants. The whole industry is in pain at the minute. Do you get support from a mental health standpoint? Because that's something I think that's often overlooked, where the assumption is that, they're fine, they've got money, they'll find something else, they're clever, they're geniuses, so they'll be fine. You're going to drop into something and everybody's going to clamor for your skill set, particularly as you've mentioned that, you may not necessarily start off this journey with a backup plan. Jennifer, what's your take on this?
My take on it is we need as pilots to look after ourselves, because unfortunately nobody does that for us. I think everybody did that until the point when COVID happened and we did not know what to do. So far, growing up into the world and then joining the industry at a young age, it felt like people were walking with me, people were helping me out. But then you realize that COVID happens, nobody saw it coming, and everybody's kind of looking to protect their own backs. So you find yourself alone, you don't know what the future holds, you feel a bit let down, which sometimes I wonder, do I have the right to feel let down? But anyways, so you get to that place where you have to look after yourself. You have to go back and look over your CV, update it. You have to do a mental check on yourself. Check in with your family. How are you doing? A part that really played with me was the fact that everybody could do teleworking except me. So everyone would wake up in the morning and have their company send them work and do things, and I was just sitting at home doing nothing. And I felt like, wait, is my job that great? Because it really depends on both my hands, both my feet. And if that's not it, then there's nothing I can do. So that made me think a lot. And that's when I also realized that maybe I'm going to have to put some degree in there, or at least do something to be productive, to share knowledge and to acquire knowledge. So that's when you go to online courses, that's when your creative side just comes out and everything. But I think in this season, it was very important to realize that you have your own back, and companies don't have your back as much as you think they do, because when situations like COVID that we did not plan come, you realize that everybody is about their own best interest and not necessarily yours. So you have to check in with yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. I've said since the beginning of COVID, when I stopped flying in March, I said, I did not create COVID. So I can feel bad, but I'm not going to feel that bad. I'm not going to beat myself up because COVID happens. I'm just going to go with the flow and do what I can to help my community, to help my family, and to help myself.
I think that's a very powerful statement you make around, everybody else being able to adapt by working remotely or being able to kind of reorganize the way of working. Whereas you don't have a simulator sitting in your living room, so it's not like you can carry on training in obvious ways, I would imagine. So yeah, quite a potent point that is. Anyone else who's got something compelling to share on this point? And actually, you talk about people not having your back. Why do you not have a network amongst yourselves where you encourage each other and support each other? Does that not exist?
Which is something that we're coming up more often with, because we realize that we don't even have group chats when we can just share how we're feeling. We don't have forums where we can speak about what's next. It's only LinkedIn, maybe WhatsApp chats with people from work, but we don't really have a global community where we can speak about what's up. You only hear from one colleague that this other colleague lost their job, or from one person that this company is closing, but you're not really informed. So I think it's something that we need to look into, and I'm personally working on that. So I hope with my friends here, we can talk about it later.
I keep saying that one of the things I'm most proud and most passionate about this platform is its ability to create networks within sectors. So I really do hope that you follow up on that, because you've got a natural ecosystem right here where you guys should be looking out for each other, encouraging each other to apply for jobs if something comes up in your respective companies. So there's no reason whatsoever why we don't do that. The Indians are very good at doing that. Most races actually are brilliant at taking people along with them. We've got a shortcoming, and that's something that I hope we're able to address. Anyone else with a point on this?
Speaking about communities and other aviators within the industry to be there for each other, I don't know if you've ever heard about the 99s International Organization for Women Pilots. Sorry, guys. This one's for the ladies.
Plug it in. Plug. Let's hear about it.
But yeah, it's called the 99s International Organization for Women Pilots, and it's broken down into different sections for each part of the world. So there is an African section, 99s. I am a member of it, and we have this big WhatsApp group where people share what they're going through. And like you say, a lot of people have lost their jobs during this time, but it's like, it's like a sisterhood. Everyone's there for each other. If you feel you need to talk to someone, and some of them are psychologists as well, so you can get actual professional help if you need so. And we also share about jobs that come up For example, when Coastal was hiring before COVID happened, I was able to let other female aviators know within the group who were still looking for jobs. So it is a nice sisterhood, you know, you get to know which companies are hiring, and it's just everyone's there for each other. So
sure.
Please join.
I'll be sure to tune in.
I would if I was in your industry, but hey ho, I like to hear stuff.
All right, thank you. Well, I was of the idea that COVID has happened. We are hard pressed on either side, but it is important to maintain our mental health, our stamina, and I believe the aviation journey is one that prepares you for something like this. My own career has faced at least 3 assassinations, which I've had to dodge bullets and shake it up and rise again. So I remain hopeful that we will rise again out of this. But not only that, you emphasize the point of meeting as groups and discussing, sharing experiences. And I have my inner circle for pilots where we just meet and discuss how we're finding it in different countries. We're privileged to be in different parts of the world. So we discuss how is it going on your end, and we work it out like that. And as mentioned by Tahira as well, that there are larger groups which are available, which we can talk about our experiences in aviation and stuff like that. One particular group is Women in Aviation International. Now, at first you may think it's strictly for females, but I discovered that it's open to both sexes. Yes, we do support our females in the industry, and it's one organization that has managed to make its footprint on the global market and has a huge following, and I recommend each aviator to join.
To add on to what they were saying, there's a saying that says that out of your greatest rejection comes your greatest direction. So I feel like you have to take the positives out of the negatives that we have. You know, as pilots, this is the time that you should, you know, focus on yourself, improve yourself, try improve your own qualification. Use this time to improve yourself. You know, there are so many online courses that you can do to try improve yourself as a pilot. And most importantly as well, just pray that this COVID finds a vaccine.
But do you think that when it does, it's going to be a return to business as usual? Because, you know, we know of companies like Virgin filing for bankruptcy. So there are structural issues happening around some of the larger carriers, and the sustainability of these businesses is at question at the minute, which may just mean there's a ripple effect, particularly if you're saying that there isn't a straightforward way of transferring your skills from piloting, i.e., Jennifer, you're talking about not being able to work remotely. What does that mean for you then in terms of your personal development and maybe looking beyond the industry? Or is your view that there's enough work to go around? You know, Lelwa, you're doing something quite interesting. You're kind of reinventing your career journey, and you're looking at technology and advances in that and seeing how you can be relevant in that space. Maybe you could walk us through as an answer to my point.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief.
It's interesting. So go for it. I'd love to get a thorough response for you on this because it's important.
Okay, thanks. In my first year as an airline pilot, I soon realized that I needed to start building some kind of backup for my life. I did it purely for medical reasons, actually, because I thought, you know what, if I end up in a car accident or I end up being diagnosed with some form of illness, I started having those questions of what would I do? So this was 5 years ago now. So I went to law school and I studied a law degree while I was flying, but I didn't think that a pandemic would happen because in my mind, I was just doing it as a safety net for medical reasons. So since the pandemic happened, I've lost my job as an airline pilot. The airline that I fly for went under liquidation because of the pandemic. So that was sort of the kick and the push that I needed to just sit and decide on what am I going to do with this law? What am I going to do with all the skills and knowledge that I've accumulated? So I've decided to go into law, and I'll be building expertise in aviation laws and in space laws. And I've also redirected now. I'm doing my drone license. So I'll be instructing people now on how to fly drones and working towards being an air and space law specialist. I was supposed to be moving to the Netherlands to start training and building my experience in air and space law, but I've had to postpone that because of the pandemic. But definitely now I'm merging all of my different passions and likes and just going into the legal side of aviation now.
Very good. That's really very inspiring. Tatenda, with you, I know that you've got your hands quite quite busy with philanthropy. You do quite a lot of stuff in that space. Is it something that you're using to occupy your time at the minute? How are you navigating this downtime that many of your colleagues have? You're still working, however, presumably you're thinking more broadly than what's currently happening in your direct day-to-day.
So I'm actually working right now because I'm a flight instructor. So we are open. I think education, anything to do with education is still occurring. But I've got passion for helping underprivileged children. So during the time when we're under lockdown, I use that as a time to, work on ways or ideas to improve it, because I want to impact the whole of Southern Africa. So I want to start it here in Namibia. So that's something that I've been working on to improve the lives of underprivileged children through my qualifications. So I'm trying to offer education through aviation.
Wow.
So personally, I started a blog where I get to speak about aviations and matters that are dear to my heart. My goal is to have a voice, because besides flying, what else do I have until I get another degree, or until I get a degree? It's going to have to be my voice and the experience that I've accumulated over the years, and being able to inspire people and being able to highlight problems that need to be addressed. So this season has helped me realize that this is not the end of the world. Even though it looks like it, it's not, because you still have your voice. You still can change something. You can reconvert not your whole career path, but you can add something to what you're already doing. If you know that flying planes is inspiring people and you don't really talk about it, now is the time to talk about it more often. If you are going through experiences that may benefit your colleagues or younger people, how about you document that? How about you share it with them and inspire more people to get more representation? Because I feel like if COVID hadn't happened, and we have to be honest about it, it helped us to some extent. Like, I was a different person than I'm now 5 months ago, and that's because of COVID. And I think I developed more soft skills than I had before the crisis happened, and I learned to speak in front of people publicly. This is not something I would do. I was always behind my cockpit door. I don't want to see anybody. I can just hide there and do my thing and go home. But now people want to know how you're doing, and you have to inspire them in the process. So I think this season should really help us to realize that we have more than just our technical knowledge. We also have a voice to be sharing other things. So I think that's what it did for me.
Oh, fantastic. And you've been quite a young one getting into this space, and you've got quite a few accolades that follow you. So I'd imagine you've got a following of people who are quite keen to hear what you have to say and who would seek inspiration from you. In fact, just browsing through the comments, you've got a lot of endorsements coming through, which is absolutely brilliant. But, I do say that as you spoke there, I did kind of want to change gears just a tad bit and say that male-female dynamic in most environments, you talk about being behind a cockpit and learning soft skills. Did you feel that you needed to become man-like to survive in this space? Did you feel you had to compete with your male colleagues in a different kind of way to remain relevant, to be respected? What's that male-female dynamic like in aviation?
Okay, I think it's general. We're only 5% of women in the industry. So I've never flown with a woman before. So the likelihood that I might is still very small. Getting to the industry, I did not have a female figure. So again, you draw the inspiration from yourself, or you just reach out of your immediate environment. So I've made friends with captains from Kenya, with female captains from all over the world, to get that inspiration from there, because we're quite a small community on my side of the world here. The dynamics at work, I constantly, especially at the beginning, felt like I had to prove myself. But it's a huge mistake to do, because you realize that it's never enough if you're seeking people's validation. You're already good enough at being where you are right now. So there is no need to prove anything to any other person. If you have to prove something, then maybe it would be to yourself. So I decided to shift the focus from people looking at me to me looking at myself and saying, you know what, I'm here for a reason. I can do this. I know how to fly an airplane. I know how to communicate with people. Why don't I just focus on putting all this together and being my authentic self? You would easily get lost in the process. I'm the only woman on my fleet. It's just me with a whole bunch of men. So the subjects they speak about, their way of flying, everything is different. Everything is different. And I wish I had like a woman to look at and say, oh, I'm more similar, but I'm not. So it's either you decide to carry on with this, knowing that you're unique, or you try and copy other people and you lose your authenticity in the process. So what I can advise somebody there is be yourself. Unfortunately, we're still 5% of women. We're working on bringing more women in to at least change the percentage in the coming years from 5% to 7% and from 7% to 10%. I'm sure we can do this. But for now, if you don't find a female model in your immediate environment, be your own model. Be authentic. It's not a fight between men and women. It's you versus you. Yeah.
So this is really, really fast. I mean, 5% is a tiny, it's a minuscule number. And these are crazy percentages for me to hear. I say that, but you know, this is replicated in other industries too. What is it about piloting that doesn't appeal to women? And guys, please jump into this as well. In your journeys, how is it that women haven't been inspired to join the industry?
And we need more representation. So it's been a male-dominated industry, and I mean the fact that on TV, the first time I ever saw a female pilot was about 3 years ago in a movie. It says a lot.
3 years ago in a movie.
There's not a lot of school drives to tell
hold on,
a lot of the girl child that
3 years ago
there
in
is
a movie.
a possibility.
Hang on, John. 3 years ago in a movie was
that
the
was
first
the first
time you saw a woman. Wow. What movie is this? That is crazy. Crazy. Okay.
A woman being playing a pilot, an actress playing a pilot. That was 3 years ago.
Wow. Okay, John is freezing out. So let's hear from one of the other boys. Why do you think women aren't coming into the industry?
No, you can go first. It's fine.
Why don't you go out?
All right.
We're running out of time.
All right. So I think it is a matter of exposure as well. We're not having enough ladies going out there and representing on the social media, but that's something that I'm seeing changing on the social media space. I mean, my very own instructor from flight school, Bali Maku, has been making the headlines on media, talking about women in aviation, and I think that's in the right direction. We also have advocates of female in the cockpit in South Africa, such as the likes of Tubi Katisi, who are representing the female Black child within South Africa and encouraging her to take on her dreams and grow her wings. So I think we are going to see within the next 10 to 20 years a rise in the number of female pilots. And I think the world just isn't ready for it yet.
Well, the fact that you've only got a 5% representation and I've got 50% on this panel makes me feel like the GOAT. Tatenda, you wanted to say something, right?
Yeah, I wanted to say that there's also a percentage that the amount of Black pilots in the world is actually quite low. I heard that it was about 7%, 8%. And why it was that low, it was because as Black people, me personally, when growing up, I thought it was out of my reach, out of a Black person's reach. So I'm just guessing that being, I think Jennifer mentioned it, that she didn't have a lot of, growing up, she didn't have a lot of female pilots to look up to. So not having a lot of female pilots that you see that, okay, if she can do it, I can do it, as motivation, could have played a part. But like Elle said, there being now more female pilots out there and on social media, that up and coming women who are growing up can now see them, will want to become pilots. So I definitely think the percentage will go up.
So I refuse to accept that you guys aren't geniuses. My mind isn't quite shifting gears on this point, right? So let's work with me here. Having identified all these issues, is there a part of you that feels that you want to start advocating for financing, if you like, for Black, for females, where you're actually having a concerted, if you like, campaign to say, guys, listen, we've got these kids coming out of schools. We are taking the charge to demystify what our industry looks like. However, there's this financing issue. We can do something about it by being the faces of a financial campaign. Is that something that you would ever think of doing? you've got downtime now, right? You're talking about not using your time to do stuff you love. Perhaps it's about thinking creatively around how you take people along with you.
The African section that I was talking about, the 99s organization, they actually they offer scholarships and they sponsor certain parts of your training if the funds are available. Because as members, you pay a yearly membership fee, and they try and get that money into sponsoring female pilots too. And not just pilots, any part of the aviation industry, whether it's air traffic controllers or engineering, anything within the aviation space. And they also encourage us as members to try and go out into schools and encourage the STEM program, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Exactly. So we try and do that as as much as we can, so you can inspire them from young. And just another thing to point out that we were talking about before is going right back to flying school. When I worked as a flight instructor, the female students I had, it's never about are they capable of flying or not. It's more about can they handle the pressure that they get from males. You would find that a lot of male instructors within the flying school, I think it's just natural with certain males to just put a female down. Okay, it's not intentional, not always, but it just happens, and and females, you're naturally more emotional. If someone snaps at you, you're going to be like, you're not going to take it like how a guy would just look at you and be crazy, Yeah. So now they bring in the emotional thing into the cockpit, where now they try, they get emotional. Some end up crying. I've had many students not crying for me. And that's from a female to a female. So what more when it's a male and a female? So the females also need to you have to be very confident. You can't let the emotions get in the way of anything, because it will put you down.
Okay, so this idea of women maybe not having the steel, the metal to be able to withstand pressure and to withstand that male dominance, is it something that you speak out on? Is it something that you seek training for? Are you needing to do this in your personal capacity? How do you manage this? Because again, we spoke of mental health earlier on, and this is how people end up having nervous breakdowns and quitting, committing suicides, the works. So there's a whole host of psychological issues that are born out of what guys just rub off the shoulder is no big deal. He's just a temperamental guy. I can handle it. We like to be communicated with differently. Tell me what organizations do as a duty of care to female employees particularly, or what you found you've had to do to survive this.
I think you just got to block it out, to be honest. You just got to block them out, because it never stops. Even up to now, I'm a captain in my company, and we're only 2 females left in the company after the retrenchments and layoffs. And up until today, you still get it. You will do a line check or a proficiency check, and they're going to say something negative. It will always, always happen. You just have to completely block them out and just carry on doing what you're doing. That's how I deal with it.
You all agree it's about blocking it out? This sounds counterintuitive to me.
Personally, I don't block it out. I just take it in and let go, because blocking it out kind of makes me unaware of my environment, because you need to know who or what triggers what. So what I do is I don't block it out per se, but I just take it in that this is the comment I got, and it's not always negative. Sometimes it's constructive. Sometimes you can do something better. So blocking it out, I feel, would make me ignore everything they say to me. And I don't want to be ignoring everything. I just want to be ignoring the stuff that is not constructive to me. So I take it in and then I filter. Is this said to make me a better person? Yes, okay, I keep it. If it's not, then I'm not going to pay much attention to it. And the advantage of being a woman is that you're expected to feel. So how about you take it and you feel? So once you're done feeling, you go. But what we've faced here in contrast to men is men are not allowed to feel. It's changing now. So in the same way that a captain who's a male would go off on a female captain, a female first officer, it would also go off on the male. But the difference between the female and the male is that the female will talk about it to everybody she sees, and the male might just let go, like ignore it. And I feel like on the long run, it kind of piles up, and next thing you know is they're having like serious mental breakdowns. And this is what we're trying to avoid. So I don't think blocking everything out is so it could be somebody's solution, but I also think we should explore just taking it in and filtering what is good from what is bad and just moving on with it.
Yeah, and that filtering mechanism is what doesn't always work for a lot of people, right? Because there is a tendency sometimes to take these things quite personally. And when I'm thinking again about the male-female dynamic, one thing that occurs to me is there's typically an association that females in aviation are flight attendants. So as you guys start to rise to the surface and stand out as this elite, badass crew of females who are breaking into these male spaces, I do again wonder how you kind of network and make sure that you talked about mentoring. So at the point you've identified that there aren't enough mentors out there, what have you done to bridge that gap?
I think for me, I've been mentoring young girls since 2013, but not specifically young girls who want to be in aviation. I've been mentoring girls who want to be in different fields. And I do have a group of 10 young girls who want to be pilots. So I guide them with funding applications. I assist them to apply. I assist them with advice on their training. I've got 2 that are at flight school, and they have some of the challenges that Tahira was mentioning. And I'll guide them over the phone and say, okay, this is how you approach this situation. This is what you do with your instructor. And you have to guide them, because it is quite difficult, that male-female dynamic. It's very challenging. I've tried my best to mentor and assist more young girls to get into different spaces, to get funding.
Quick one for the guys, yes or no? Do you mentor females who are interested in aviation?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of you are saying yes. I want someone who's mentored by these guys to come back onto this panel and confirm that this is fact. Maybe you do. That's brilliant, guys. That really is fantastic.
I hope they're listening. If out there, Ricardo, memory, guys, please chip in.
Sure. All right, guys. As it well,
we support women in aviation.
You like that? Okay, so I've run over 5 minutes and I'm a bit of a stickler for time, but there is something that I really need to ask. And Marlon Parutsa is my buddy because he's asking a question that bugs me, which is about access to flight paths that make sense on the continent as a starting point. We have got very, very expensive routes in Africa, which is absolutely crazy, makes no sense. And that's not quite your question, Marlo, but I'm actually remixing it because I do actually want to touch on this idea. What is it about the continent that makes it so difficult to have normal flight paths, normal routes on the continent, inexpensive routes that kind of allow for trade and freedom of movement in a more succinct and sustainable way?
I think the national airlines of most African countries don't have cadet programs, whereas if you compare it to Europe, a lot of European airlines have cadet programs, so they would fund your actual flight training all the way until you have your commercial pilot license. You would then undergo training for whatever aircraft type you will be flying for them, and you enter the airline that way. Whereas in Africa, Ethiopian does that, but it's only for Ethiopian citizens, and I'm not too sure which other ones do it, but the majority of the national airlines don't have cadet programs. So you've got to fund your way through, and early on it was mentioned that you don't have enough hours once you do finish to actually go to that specific airline, even if it's in your home country where you're entitled to work there, right? So you've got to find other means and avenues and paths to get the hours. So
any alternative view? Will we get to a stage where markets are accessible because we've got working routes, we've got an integration on the continent that makes sense, there's cross-pollination of skill sets from east to west to southern Africa? Or is this a utopian view? Am I being a bit Wakanda about this?
It will take quite a while, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah.
John? I guess there is, if we look at it in the African market, at the moment, we don't have that many players. I mean, last year we were looking at 4.6% growth within Africa. And I mean, 11% of that came from Ethiopian. So once we do start to get more, we'll start to see some of these routes and parts becoming cheaper and more options for passengers. Because at the moment we have it's almost a monopoly within Africa. And we need to start moving away from that.
Talk to me about Ethiopia. What is it about them? Because when I've been looking at flights, they're just about the only airline that seems to be doing anything at the moment. What is it about their structure? What is it about maybe even their politics, their governance, their regulator that means that they're the guys who are able to monopolize the African routes currently?
I was reading an article the other day, and apparently Ethiopian Airways in March of this year decided to totally go full on in terms of their cargo operations. So they're having to convert several of their aircraft to shift from passenger traffic to cargo operations. And currently they own 25 Boeing 737s, which they're using for cargo operations, and if I'm not mistaken, 10 777s. And that just is not enough to meet the demand that they're meeting for cargo operations right now, because the cargo business is doing very well. In fact, Ethiopian Airways was saying that 50% of their income this year has been from the cargo side. And then you look at companies like Cathay Pacific, which has been thriving in this pandemic, and it's mainly due to their cargo operations. So cargo is really what has kept a lot of airlines going. And you find that the likes of, just to throw in Air Zimbabwe there, as I'm patriotic, we couldn't exactly dive into the cargo operations, but we took an opportunity to do repatriate flights with Maple Aviation, which was another pathway to surviving the times. The times are tough. You got to come up with new solutions on how to survive.
As we look to close, if I could just go around the table and get a view from you of what you think the future of aviation is going to look like, both from a pilot's perspective and then more broadly flights and people being able to go on holidays and beautiful stuff like that.
I think it's going to get back to normal. Within Tanzania, we've been very fortunate that we only stayed at home for April and May. We got back to working in June. We never ever had a lockdown. We initially had quarantine, but that also came to a stop. And at the moment, there's no quarantine. We have quite a few airlines that have resumed their operations to Tanzania. So tourism has already started picking up. We have guys coming from all over the world. So yeah, I think I'm very hopeful and positive. And at the moment, our routes are also expanding within our company. So we're starting to bring back pilots that we did lay off. So I think it's going to grow. No one can stay at home forever. Everyone wants to go on holiday. It's going to get back to normal.
Aviation will recover. That's a definite. It will recover perhaps 2023, going forward from there. But certainly we will recover from this. I see a different aviation. I see a different industry. I see different terminal structures. I see face recognition. I see different pilots. I see flexible pilots, adaptable pilots, pilots not only flying the aircraft, but pilots doing things outside of the flight deck too. I see a lot of change. I see adaptable airlines, airlines that go from passenger to cargo. As we've seen, a lot of airlines have become flexible to say, okay, we're going to switch to cargo now. I definitely see a different landscape going forward. Absolutely. I see more technology advancements being used in order to make it a touchless experience. I know some aircraft engineers are already rethinking certain structures of the aircraft in terms of ventilation in order to reduce the infection rates within aircraft. So a lot of changes.
That's very comprehensive and brilliant. Thank you. Any other views to add to that?
Yeah, if I may. Now, I heard that one of the ladies mentioned earlier on that we're expecting normalcy in 2023. That was actually something that was said by the International Air Transport Association, IATA, which estimates that passenger traffic will not return to its normal levels up until as late as 2023. Now, that's a huge blow to the aviation industry when you look at the fact that just last year in June, Boeing estimated that the world needed 800,000 new pilots within the next 20 years. Now, that's 40,000 pilots per year that was supposed to be getting generated by flight schools. Now, as a result of this, going forward, we're going to see early retirements for the senior captains within the airlines to pave way for the younger generation, which is coming in. And I happen to be an advocate of that, seeing as I'm quite young myself. As for layoffs and job cuts, I see a lot of that recently. Just my former employer had to lay off 80% of their flight crew. And that's something that we're going to have to work with. As pilots, I'd say a lot of us at the moment are seriously considering flight instruction as a way to cope with the pandemic. But like Tahir said earlier on, we are seeing a positive rate of climb at the moment and remain hopeful a brighter end.
Fantastic. And you tell me that you guys don't need to be geniuses with all those stats you were just dropping in there, like anyway. Let's go with who else has got a view to add to this? Future of aviation.
Just what Elle said, we have to look at, IATA gave us a speculation. So that is 2023, 2024, we'll go back to 2019 passenger figures. But that could change with a vaccine for COVID, that could change. But there are definitely going to be a lot of changes within aviation in itself. But, we really have to look at it very carefully. We're putting away the A380s. The last production A380 was 2 months ago. And a lot of companies aren't going to be bringing those aircrafts back. But 2019 figures would need aircrafts that size or double the aircraft. So it's a very interesting place to be, because if we do get rid of the 380s, we're looking at, you need 2 aircrafts to cover what one 380 could do. So I guess in the next 4 years, we'll really start to see how aviation is going to start shaping up for the pilots themselves.
And the environmentalists will be going wild when you talk about doubling up on physical aircraft, I'm sure. Let's go with Jennifer, future of aviation.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight the fact that as pilots and as aviators, we need to be prepared. I'm not saying that this is going to happen again, but it caught us all off guard. So we need to make sure that if this happens again, we are ready for it. A lot of us lost our jobs because we were not ready for it. There is a lot that goes on behind closed doors when it comes to management and the workforce. And usually pilots don't really feel like as a group, as united as they can be, they can change something. But think about it, if pilots had a voice bigger than the one they've had before, maybe they weren't going to be the first person to be laid off in such a situation. So pilots need to be able to document, need to be able to come together and speak about what our importance is, what do we need to work on in case of a crisis like this, what can we ensure can the company give us back. You get pilots that do some company work, you get pilots that decide that they want to do ground work. If another crisis like this comes, I want to be able to say, okay, I might not be flying, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and just print documents for the office just because I decide not to be a liability when crisis comes. So I think as pilots, we need to come together and realize that there is more to us than just flying planes, and we are bright enough to come up with alternatives within the company to help us salvage our jobs when need be. So it has to be a discussion, a serious discussion between pilots, but also between them and management to understand that in case something like this happens again, I don't think a lot of pilots will be willing to lose their jobs again. It's not something that we can risk again. So we all need to be ready for that.
Brilliant. So I'm going to have a part 2 of this conversation, an hour 17 minutes in, which is a bit unprecedented. Normally I try to restrict it to an hour, but you guys have been absolutely fantastic and I've learned so much speaking to you. I come onto this platform as somebody seeking an understanding of what it's like to work in an industry that I only know as a consumer. So, when you start to break it down as you have, the things that stay with me are, one, this idea of the transferability of your skill set, what that means, where retraining becomes something quite important to you. What alternatives could you very easily and seamlessly transition into? Does the industry allow you to train beyond flying an aircraft? If not, what can be done about that? These are all quite key issues. And of course, that 5% and John's movie from 3 years ago resonate with me quite strongly. We want to see more females in the industry. We want to hear more females speak. So maybe, ladies, I can charge you with getting us a panel of all female pilots for the next one. Let's have an intergenerational discussion with female captains and people who are quite fresh in the industry. And let's hear what they have to say about how they can mentor and bring younger ones along.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for your time tonight. You've been a stellar panel. Nice to have you in the network now. And please do keep sharing.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.